Hello, everybody. This is Terry Fitch, Sales Manager for First Watch, and we have Chris Carlson here with me, who is going to be your main demo person today to show our fire operations and analytics / accreditation module with the acronym FOAM, just to make it a little bit simpler as we keep talking through. We are recording this session as well, so we'll send out that webinar link to the people that were registered, whether they're on here right now or not. We'll still go ahead and send that link out. We appreciate you being on and joining us for FOAM. We're looking at about a 45-minute overview as we drill into the actual live sites of FOAM itself, and Chris will drill down into all of the newest features and capabilities of this module. For some of you that are on here right now that already have FOAM, you'll see some new additions that are coming into the system that you'll be getting in the future and in your next update. But with that, I want to introduce Chris Carlson, and just a little bit of background about this guy is he was a paramedic firefighter at Solana Beach Fire down here in San Diego County years and years ago,
decades ago.
And then Chris accepted the role of a fire chief in Turlock Fire up in Northern California. When he got tired of being up in NorCal and wanted to come back to the real world of Southern California, he became the fire chief at La Mesa Fire, where he retired, as well as holds the Executive Fire Officer certification. That was via the National Fire Academy, so he still holds that, and that's why it's some of the main pieces of why Chris leads our FOAM product management team on our end with the product itself to drive it and move it forward. And a lot of you, as you're talking to us about FOAM, you'll be talking with Chris and another cohort who is Daniel about all the components and the pieces that are important to your agency, because these pieces of the reports that you're going to see in the bundle are tailored to your agency a little bit more in depth than what a generic type of a report would be. So with that said, Chris, as we get started and before we actually look at the fire operations, and let's just call it FOAM, would you just take a minute to talk about how FOAM came to life?
Absolutely, Terry. So in terms of First Watch and what we basically do, just to put it in context, we've essentially been doing data in the public health, public safety fields for over 21 years now. We have about 400-plus customers in 200 major metro markets around the U.S. and Canada. And the reason that it's important for you all to understand that is as we move into a data-influenced or data-driven society, there's a lot of vendors that will come up and they'll say, oh, this is easy, we can do this. Well, the reality of it is what we've found in 21 years of doing this is there's a couple of limitations. One is raw data is exactly that. It's raw and uncooked and often really ugly. And data that appears in the variety of data sets that we can look at, which can be everything from CAD data to EPCR data to records management data to phone switch data to HL7 hospital data, comes to us. And often the data that you think you're going to be looking at isn't found where the software vendor thought it would be. So oftentimes, there's maybe not a perfect match between, clinical performance on our clinical side or the operational side. And oftentimes things are found in free text or perhaps not where you expect to find them. So what we've learned is the ability to take this raw data and make meaningful information out of it. So because of that, the experience that our clients and customers have had over the years, they've come to us and said, you could do a pretty good job of kind of cleaning out this data and making sure that we want to be involved in the analysis of that. Because that's really important, right? Especially those of you who are in executive positions, your credibility rides on the data that you present, and it does you or your organization no good to have data that constantly changes, from day to day, report to report. And that's what we help do in homogenizing that data for you. So we had several of our fire customers come to us as they got into accreditation initially and said, geez, you guys are really good at, having computers do what computers should do, and then calling our attention when we need the skills, knowledge, perspective, abilities of our leadership to look at things and have a human being, apply common sense to what we're doing. And it seems that that would be really valuable to us, because as people become accredited, they universally have two reactions. The first one is one of celebration and joy, the yay, we won, we got it, congratulations, followed immediately by, you know, a holy blank moment, like what do we do now? Because those of you that are accredited know this can be a very labor-intensive process. And most of the labor around that is, you know, typically looking at your data to see what your outliers are, what is data in there that you don't want to have included, especially since CFAI has become much more rigid in their application of exclusions. And no longer is it acceptable to just say, oh, anything over, you know, 8 minutes is an exclusion, anything over 1.5 standard deviations is an exclusion. They really frown on that, and it's not acceptable for your site visits anymore. So it's become more and more important as we've gone through it. Now, incidentally, as we've developed this over, gosh, that's 2.5 years, I guess, yep, something like that, we've had other agencies that look at the data that's presented and say, you know, I have no interest whatsoever in accreditation. You know, can't afford it, not going to have it, manager doesn't get it, mayor doesn't get it, I don't care. But you know what, this is actually really good data for either public transparency or for, I can automate a large part of my end-of-month report, I can automate large portions of my responsive standards of cover document or my strategic planning document. So while I'm not interested per se necessarily in accreditation, I am really interested in the analysis of this data and be able to present it and filter it in a variety of ways that is meaningful to me and my board. So that drafted the big internal debate that we have, that are we limiting it by saying fire operations and accreditation, or is it really fire operations and analytics? And the reality is it's both. So whatever works for you, we have the ability to help it and deal with that. Now, I wanted to point out real quickly, and Terry mentioned it very briefly, is that one of the things that's different about foam from other products that are out there is it is very much customized to your unique criteria, right? So it does require an iterative process. As you go through your standards of cover document and strategic plans, we need to understand what your risk categories are, low, moderate, high. We need to understand what your standards of cover document is. We need to be able to map across the right units to the right responses. We need to understand your geographic areas and your geospatial areas that we want to map to in an appropriate way. So there is some sweat equity that's required to get it right, but the advantage is, you know, at the end of that probably 6-week period or so, we then have a tool basically that can give you the data that you are looking for, and everyone has the ability to understand what that data is and what's included and not included, and it is clean as opposed to just raw data being thrown into it. So a couple things to understand. For those of you that are familiar with First Watch, every First Watch customer initially has two, what we call triggers. For those of you that aren't familiar with First Watch, those are really algorithms and filter criteria that we apply, logic that we apply to the data to try to get, you know, calculated fields at the end of the results or determine whether something is within parameter or outside of parameter. So every customer has an all incidents trigger and an all responses trigger, and that gives us the ability to look at all incidents and each of the responses, individual apparatus responses within each of those incidents, which is an important concept that we'll come back to here in a minute. When you subscribe to foam, we create 2 additional mega triggers, if you will. One is a foam all incidents trigger, and one is a foam all responses trigger. And the difference there is within those triggers, it basically takes the all incidents or all responses and filters it through the criteria and the filter that you provide for us to only report on those incidents that are related to either your emergency response criteria or your accreditation criteria. So, for example, if you wanted to, you know, automatically sort out special service calls, if you wanted to sort out, you know, out-of-district calls or identify them, those kinds of things, we have the ability to either sort those out or categorize those in a way that we can make meaningful data for you. And I'll have a couple of examples of the reporting criteria that we have for that. So I spent a little bit of time here kind of talking about a 20,000-foot level, the overview of, kind of the background and some of the discrepancies that kind of people look at when maybe they're looking at emergency response or system performance data versus all incidents and all triggers. Having said that, Terry, is there any questions that have popped up?
None so far.
Awesome.
You're clear.
Awesome. Okay, so let me start with what kind of drives the entire, as a foundational piece and drives basically the entire module. So those of you that are involved in accreditation will recognize this as what's known as an ACR, or Annual Compliance Report. It is a mandated reporting mechanism for accredited agencies. And there's several elements to it, and it's actually pretty powerful, and as I said, it serves essentially as the foundation for the remainder of the platform. You have several different reporting abilities in this, right? So up here on the top, so this is our filter criteria, you have the ability to sort the date range that you want. So for example, accredited agencies now have to do 5 years comparison of their performance on these various metrics. People that came in, the agencies that came in 3, 4 years ago only had 2, 3, or 4 year comparison. And as I said, not every agency is interested in accreditation. So we give you a wide variety of abilities for legacy comparison, and we now have the ability to also put that in a fiscal year basis. So if you have an October fiscal year or a July fiscal year, we just need to know that up front as part of the iterative process and get that set up. Or if you're interested in reflecting this data on a quarterly basis or a monthly basis, you have the ability to create a specific date field surveillance period to look at it and report on. So I'll sit here with, I'll just leave it at 2 years since some of these have a lot of data involved in it. You have the ability to include or exclude your current year. So for those agencies that are accredited, if you're going to your accreditation or your site visit, you don't necessarily want to include current year because it's less than a full year of data. You just want to be able to report out to the end of the last year or last time segment, so you have the ability to include or exclude. And you have the ability to report out by your risk categories, right? So again, people that are accredited know that this comes back essentially the task analysis, which is looking at, within the standards of cover concept, how many people do you need for the various tasks and risks that you are going to find, within your protection zone or things that you're looking for. So you can sort this out by, it's looking just at low or what's high. Or in this particular example, we give you the option of having your non-emergent calls, right? So rather than just reporting on emergency operations, if you want to see what the total impact is of your system, including, lockout, special service, whatever the case may be, you have the ability to include those in there. So the filter criteria is then reflected here in the overall description up top. And then each of your risk response categories, which again you define as an agency, are reflected in its own separate page. Everything within foam is reported at a 90th percentile performance level. Again, that's consistent with accreditation. So what we have here basically, as I said, this is a pretty powerful report. We have alarm handling time with a definition of what that is, so you can explain it to your local elected officials, what that exactly means. Turnout time for the first unit, travel time for both your first unit and your ERF, or effective response force. Again, that's going to be based on the severity of the risk up there for various types. And total response time, both for the first unit and your total ERF concentration. In the CFAI accreditation, they have response density, urban and rural. So we categorize it by that. You can obviate that if you want. You don't need to do it, or if you have some other categorization. If you're not accredited, we can include that there for you. This is, again, reported the 90th percentile, the various 90th percentile times as it relates to these response time segments. And each individual agency is able to set its own benchmark or goal. So you have there very visually just like, well, here's our goal and here's what our current level of performance is. And you can see over time whether it's getting better or getting worse. And we provide that in a graphical format that I will get to in just a minute. So in this particular example, we have fire suppression, all of those response times related to that. We have Hazmat, 90th percentile, technical rescue, and EMS. If you have unique hazards, you have a marina, you know, submarine construction site, whatever it is that you have, that you have a specific risk response category, we will include that in for you as well. All right, does that make sense? Any questions yet, Terry?
None.
Okay, sweet.
You've got them dazzled.
Okay, let's go with dazzled. That's right. So let me kind of take you through the suite of reports that we have here. There are 10 reports now associated with the foam module. The first one is unit hour utilization, or a UHU report. Hold on for 1 second. And again, you have several filter criteria here that you can look at, right? So you can sort it by shift. You can sort it by battalion or district, whatever works for you in particular. You can sort by engines, trucks, other type of apparatus. Again, risk area, and I think what I will do here is I'll take out the non-emergent. And let's just say I want 2 stations within Battalion 1. And it gives you the ability to set a minimum number of calls so as to not distort your data. So if you have like a battalion chief or you have a light and air unit that doesn't run any calls or has run 2 calls, sometimes that will distort your y-axis as you graph these things out. So you have the ability to kind of set your display to see, to minimize or to put limits on what's going on. So UHU, or unit hour utilization, is a very simple analysis tool. It basically takes the total number of hours or minutes within a shift. So if it's a 24-hour, 48-hour, 12-hour, 8-hour, or 4-hour surge unit, and divides the total task time for emergency response only against that denominator. So you can see in this case, we've also have these conditionally formatted so that essentially down here, anything of 25% or less is green, 26 to 30 is yellow, and anything over 31% is red. You can set your criteria however you want, based on the busyness of your system and your individual units. We break these up by EMS, rescue, transport units, engines, trucks, and if you had other specialty units, we could clearly add those as well. On page 2 here, I think we have the specialty units, other apparatus, air and battalions going forward on that. So this is kind of just a fairly static report, but where it does come in handy, obviously, as you know, if you were to want to demonstrate the workload on, a downtown unit or a unit out in an area where you've done an annexation or a contract, or maybe there's a new development, seasonal impacts of fairgrounds or, high-risk categories, you have the ability then to, actually look at this and be able to visually demonstrate what the impact is on an hourly workload basis on your system for various things. Transport report basically just reports by, again, however you want to report the transports that are done within your system. And for those of you that don't do transport, it then also has a category that provides a report of the number of ambulance or transport assists that you do. So if you were to, for example, you have paramedic engines and you have paramedics that ride in occasionally on high criticality patients, or your system uses fire suppression people in a dual capacity to jump off of engines or trucks or rescues onto ambulances, you then have the ability to visually demonstrate and say, here's my total number of responses, here's the total number of transports incidents, total number of transports that came out of that, and the number of times that we did a transport assist or assisted the transport unit using fire suppression resources. All right. Is there a question that's come up?
There was one question asking about when you're determining that it's a non-emergency call, is that filtered by the call type, or is it the priority, or, is there any criteria to that?
Yeah, so it's totally up to each individual agency. If you have, Pro QA or you use the Academy, we can do it by that. Or we can just do mapping on the front side that says, okay, if this is a special service call, we're going to categorize it that way, based on whatever CAD you have and whatever computer codes map to whatever type of incident that we have. Does that make sense?
Yep.
All right. Okay, so I talked about accreditation. Time analysis graph is just a visual representation of all of those things that we just talked about all in one place. It gives you some flexibility to show what various segments you want to display, right? So again, you can just say, oh, I want to know what A shift is, for example, or I want to know what battalion is, and I want to know what my overall dispatch time is, or all the way through to dispatch turnout time and travel. Again, we have the ability to put a control on the y-axis so that you don't have these wide variations of, let's say you have a rural unit that may have a 22-minute response time, and you have downtown units that have 4-minute response times. Sometimes that creates really weird-looking graphs. So we have the ability to limit that by using this option right here. You can solve by call type, so if you just wanted to know fire, if you just wanted to know EMS, any of those response categories that we identified within the accreditation report, you have the ability to do that. And then it just creates this nice little graph to you. Of course, you can export as a PNG or a JPEG file that basically will show all of the response time segments, right? So let me close this up here a little bit, give you a little more visual. So here you have the ability to visually represent, again, this is by station. Remember, I selected just station 1 and station 10. This is the call processing time. This is the turnout time. This is the travel time. And then we created, based on the feedback of some of our customers, this thing that we've called unit response. So basically what it is at the 90th percentile, the response time that a unit or a station can control or within their ability, right? So turnout time and travel time then represents the station performance or the unit performance time, and then the overall response time for the particular station that we selected. Now, I'm sure some of you are looking at this and adding it up and going, well, if I add that to that, it doesn't come to that. So the answer to the question is the reason that is that these are all, remember, computed at the 90th percentile fractal performance level of that data set, not necessarily just the arithmetic function of adding these together. So these are all 90th percentile of the actual data that's found within the system. We then also have the ability to provide a summary of the stations we selected, and then all stations in the system. So then you have the ability to just look at it and see, so how is an individual station or an individual shift doing within in comparison to the overall performance of my system. All right. There is a turnout time analysis, which is very popular with agencies, because as everyone on this call knows, that turnout times is one of the things that you can actually actively manage and make a pretty big impact on the overall response time segments. This report can also be auto-alerted or sent out as an email to your senior staff or your battalion chiefs, or you can make it as part of your Friday morning routine or Monday morning routine or whatever the case may be. Depending upon how you want it set up, this starts with station, but we can also do it by battalion or district if you have such things. Drilling down on the station gives you all of the units within that station, and then again report at the 90th percentile their turnout time for day and night if you have different standards, for evening or night times, or for EMS versus suppression. If you have different times, we can capture whatever it is that's important to you. As we move through the various systems, you can see we can get basically as granular as you want. One thing that we have not done yet is tie the individual stations or units to a personnel log or any type of personnel action. People have asked for that. It's not currently within our development schema, but I would imagine at some point within a couple of years, we'll probably be doing that down to the individual level as well. All right. aggregated district map, there is a geospatial component of this. These are just high-level overviews, but essentially whatever shape files that are important to you, we can reflect the performance for that. So these are just done at divisions, and you can see we've got the 90th percent for turnout time and 90th percentile for travel time. These are in various, they call them divisions, basically battalions, however you want to think about it. If you have councilmatic districts that you want reflected, if you have contract areas that need to be reflected, whatever geospatial things are important to you. If you're in accreditation and you want to do it by planning zones, we can certainly do and have done planning zones for people to provide just a geospatial representation of what the time is, which also then can be exported and or copied into a standards of cover or strategic plan document. Make sense?
Yes.
All right. We call this lovingly the iCreeper report, Incident Count and Response Performance.
Where'd that acronym come from?
Yeah, we love acronyms. So this basically, kind of think of this as a nice summary report, end of the week, end of the month, whatever works for you, whatever you're trying to do. It just provides a nice kind of baseline comparison of what's going on. I'll take non-emergent out of this again. We're looking at last month. So think of this as a end of month report. You can see we're capturing all 3 shifts. We're in Battalion 1 just for time. And if we run the report, it brings up essentially a summary of incidents and responses, right? So again, we have a title page that shows what it is that we're measuring. It gives you for the time period, the surveillance period that we're looking at, which is right there. And here's an interesting thing to know, right? So this is shift to shift, January 1st to February 1st, but it stops at 7:29 and the shift starts at 7:30, right? So you don't have the roll. We've automated the rollover from month to month and avoided that problem. We have a number of incidents broken down again by the risk categories: fire, EMS, hazmat, public assist, total number of incidents, and how many transports were generated out of those total number of incidents. And then as you move farther down here, you have the ability to break this down into individual unit response performance, again, looking at the segments that we reported out in the response type graph. Conditional formatting to say, red is bad, green is good, how are we doing based on our standards that we have adopted, or we have our authority having jurisdiction has adopted and told the community that we're going to do. And at the bottom here, basically, total number of responses by incident type, so a summary. Again, up here, we always have this question. This is incidents, this is responses. You got multiple responses for an incident, right? So structure fire has, 4 engines, 2 trucks, a battalion chief. That's 4, 5, 6, 7 responses, within a specific incident, just for purposes of clarification. So a nice little just automated summary of what's going on within your system. Also provides us a nice little double check, if you will, of, are we in the neighborhood of where we thought, or are we losing calls somewhere, or what's going on in terms of our total activity. 2 new reports that we've got done with the help of Daniel, our wonderful and exceptionally talented report writer. And he just entered the room, by the way, which is why I had to do that. So this is a demand, typical demand chart by hour of day, day of week. Just shows you very quickly, dynamically, conditionally formatted, where your hot spots are in terms of demand on your system and where your low spots are, so you have the ability to, quickly look at that or identify for your council or whoever, what your overall activity is. And then, again, you have a great deal of filtering capabilities up here to make that happen. Station reliability is another report that basically represents the amount of times an engine or equipment, any type of equipment responds within the service area that we would expect them to do. So think of it as like a reliability as it relates to first due-in responsibilities, right? So in this case, we have Station 1, Engine 1, 66% of their calls, 163 responses, go within their particular district. Over here on the far end of it, we also have the ability to list for you contiguous areas. So if you going into a neighboring jurisdiction or having a neighboring jurisdiction come into you because of station locations or annexation issues or whatever the case may be, you have a quick and easy way to look and see what percentage of my unit's activities are currently going to serve some other jurisdiction, and then can, at least you'll have some data then to deal with that overall nice, messy discussion that happens often. So in this case, for example, 43, 44% of this unit's calls goes into a neighboring jurisdiction, right? So I'm sure that gets your attention as you're trying to plan out your overall system deployment strategies. And again, you have the ability to sort in a variety of ways, either by individual unit or by risk category, et cetera, et cetera. Now, let me jump over real quick. One of the things that we learned in dealing with CFAI was like, okay, we kind of got this thing. What is the vision that you have for, accreditation and data? And one of the two top things that CFAI is dealing with is the need to not make the accreditation document or the SOC document or the strategic plan document just something that you will look at every 5 years and put on a shelf, and it gets dusty, and then when it's like, oh my gosh, next year we got to do it, we take it off, and then we try to put it all together. They want to make it. They want to make a fire service, a very much data influenced culture. And so we said, well, we could probably help you with that because a large part of our business is in clinical protocol compliance and continuous improvement as it relates to the clinical delivery of service. And we've learned a lot of lessons about continuous quality improvement as we have gotten into that. So if you'll note, we have taken essentially all of those 6 elements that make up the ACR, and we've recorded it over time. So remember, we're going to probably have 5 years of data. You have the ability to basically kind of look at whatever you want to look at here in terms of month or year or whatever. There's a couple of functions on here for those of you that are familiar with total quality improvement or statistical process control. We have the ability to display this as a control chart. And the thing that's interesting about control charts that we've learned is that fire systems are actually normally pretty stable, right? I mean, there's not a whole lot of dynamic deployment yet as an industry norm. People are at stations. The population base is pretty much what the population base is, except when you do annexations or large developments, politically active situations that happen in terms of development, or you get into issues of the impact of the need of adding an additional unit, whether it be a surge unit or, an additional unit based on workload, or the threat of closing a unit or browning out units or those kinds of things. And what this does over time allows you to show when there's a statistically significant change as represented by the limits on the control chart. As I said, it's very difficult to demonstrate because most of those systems are pretty static, but if we were to get into performance, or I'm sorry, first half, be able to show you where this actually shifts up, and then you can go back and say, oh, look, we closed the station in March, and in April we started having statistically significant impacts on our first unit on scene time, response time, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the other functions of this chart is you have the ability to represent the density risks. So if we wanted to include urban and rural, we could, or if we just wanted to see our overall system, we have the ability to clean that up and do that as well. Now, any of this has several filter capabilities. So you can say we have predetermined dates that we could sort by, or again, if you wanted to do this on a monthly basis or some other time period that was meaningful to you, you could change dates up here and do that as well. And then based on that date criteria, we can apply filters. So if you wanted to look and say, over time, I just want my council to see how Station 107 is doing with respect to its turnout time and demand on services, I could go in and create that filter and sort, or I just want to see what EMS calls we're doing, or if I had planning zones that I wanted to apply it to. And if I was going to do this on a monthly basis, if I was going to do this by station, on a monthly basis, I could apply these filters as I apply them, and then it'll show up as profiles. So you don't have to constantly continue to put in the variables in. You can just call up the profile and print it out or do whatever you want to do with it at the end of the month. All of these, of course, are exportable as a PNG or PDF file. And you have the ability, if you don't like line charts, you can make them bar charts, or you can show them as column charts. There we go, column charts. All right, so you can display those in a variety of ways. And, of course, you can, as I said, download those as a PDF or a PNG for inclusion in your standards of cover document or your monthly report or whatever it is that you've got to do or demonstrate. So I think we've kind of hit it at about, oh, I got one more thing. That's right. Sorry, this is the most important part, actually. Yes, don't be me. So a couple of different advantages of looking at this as a chart. Let's go over here to turnout time. So I go up here and I well, that seems like to be kind of weird. What's going on right there? So I click on that. It drives me down from a monthly view to essentially a daily view. And then you have the ability to look at this and say, oh, well, I have 8 records that are up here at 2 minutes. What are we doing? Yada, yada, yada. We can go down here and then have the ability to actually just look at the data and say, oh, well, here's here's an outlier. I want to look at that. Here's a 6-minute travel time. I want to go over here. Oops, sorry about that. And now I have the ability to link into the actual drill down or essentially the CAD data that's reflective of that incident. So in one screen with one sitting, I can just pull it up, take a look, see if there's anything strange or bizarre or weird or what the excuse was for those outliers that are questionable or that I want to look at. Because it could be something as a learning improvement opportunity, or it could be showing something more systemic that I need to look at and deal with on a real-time basis, providing feedback, to my crews and improvement, some kind of improvement modality as we move forward. So the advantage to that then is no matter how well you automate and clean up the data, which is what I talked about before, there's always going to be something that sneaks in, right? Something that's miscoded, something that just doesn't make sense, that we don't exclude under any other reason. Maybe you went on a strike team to Montana or something and have a 12-hour response time or whatever that didn't get covered in your automation. So we have then this ability to what we call the exclusion tool, right, which allows you to go in, and this brings up your all incidents trigger, and it shows you essentially what is going on, everything that's been included within the foam trigger. Remember I talked about the difference between the foam trigger and the all incidents trigger before. You have the ability then to sort by these parameters, for lack of a better term, and hit it again, it will sort from Z to A rather than A to Z. And you have the ability then to look over here and say, oh, okay, well, this was a 13-minute response time. I can go and look, pull up the report, scroll through, try to figure out what happened, where, why. Was it something that maybe shouldn't have been included in our, in our foam report? And then if you determine that, oh, well, it was a 13-minute response time because, for example, law enforcement holdback, right? So we go back in here. You create these unique qualifiers. This was provided. We probably have a group of these 7, 8, 9, or 10 that are pretty common throughout, but you have the ability to add special ones or edit these or take them all, whatever you want to do with them. But when you enter this and we say, oh, well, the reason they have a 13-minute response time is say we're pending law enforcement hold. As part of your exclusion policy, you don't want to include law enforcement holds. You then have the ability to go here and say, okay, yes, I want to save the changes. I'm not going to do it because this is real data. I don't want to mess with people. Okay. That's all right. And then what happens is that report is, that incident is excluded, the whole data field is recalculated, and you have a new set of data that is not reflected in that. But most importantly, if you come up here on reports, those incidents that are included in this excluded incident report. Did I say that? Is that all in one sentence? It's included in an excluded report. So as you actually find things and add them over time, they fall into this bucket. Oh, sorry. So they fall into this bucket. The important part of it, for those of you that are involved in accreditation, especially for more than one round, can recognize the value of this immediately, which is you basically, when your site review committee is there, you basically now have a report in one place with all of your exclusions, the exclusion criteria you have, and this presented with your call exclusion policy that your agency would have. You then basically probably saved yourself 2 or more days of explaining, what you've included and what you haven't excluded, and making your peer review committee very, very happy. Now, if you're not involved in accreditation, this also serves well, kind of getting back to that old, hey, chief, credibility issue. If there is a change in numbers, or if someone thinks it's just too good to be true or whatever, you now have in one place the ability to go, no, look, we're not lying. Here's everything that we excluded. Everything else is included in there, and these are the reasons we excluded it. So it just helps verify and create some validity for what's going on. All right. So it's a really powerful tool. People that are in accreditation have told us it just saves them an abundance of time and grief, especially when they're dealing with site visits. So I think that's it. I'm looking around. Did I miss anything from the team here?
I think you went through all the filters and all that, right?
Yeah.
So I think we're good.
Okay.
I think you hit it all.
Any questions?
Nothing so far coming through since the last one. Wow. It was just about the call type filter and for the non-emergency.
Okay.
Well, then I think if there's no other questions, there was one thing that we were talking about, maybe if we had a couple of minutes to show the live workload report. If not, then it just might be something they would be interested in as an audience. So he's going to switch gears real quick and just go over to the live workload. Give us just one quick second here while he does it.
Which one would you like me to go to?
So he's just going to swing over to a live customers report on this really quick. This is the live workload report that actually shows you as we're combating the workload fatigue issues and the units that are running more calls than others and watching their unit hour utilization. This is a way that we use CAD data to be able to look in real time as your units are working in the field and what they're doing. We've included shift times, what time they're supposed to be getting off duty, if they're on more than just a regular 24, these sort of types of capabilities. Now, in this one that we're showing from Las Vegas is breaking it down by the apparatus type. So you can see your engines, it's your ALS unit, a Quint or a rescue unit, truck or aerial. But what this is showing you is the breakdown by the actual apparatus and going into their unit hour utilization, and then it breaks it down even deeper depending on the CAD and the ability to get into this information from the CAD. But like in this case, we're able to look at the actual load of that unit and what they're running. Was there any out of service time? Were they taken out of the system, sent to the training tower, but they were on a delayed availability? These types of capabilities are also included in some of these different kinds of criteria. Were they taken out for maintenance? They're going to go into a spare. These types of things we'll be looking at. Were they just flat out of service because there's supposed to be a four-man or a four-person engine and there's only 3 people on it? These are the things that we're looking at when we're monitoring this. Are they sent out on the street for street corner posting, or are they doing a leapfrog and moving over into another station? We're watching those types of moves as well, because you may want to be able to see that. Or, we can include things like mutual aid in or out of areas. you know, these sort of boundary drops as well can be monitored. But you can see, as Chris is floating down through there, that you're able to see it by the individual apparatus and get each of their different capabilities from the fire perspective. The question came up, Chris, is can you break that down to a person, someone on an overtime shift? If we have the data. Yeah, the answer is yes to that. Is if the personnel data is in the CAD on the call itself, or if we're getting it through RMS, or however we're getting the information, if the personnel that are assigned to the unit is on it, then the answer would be yes to that.
Sweet.
I think that's, I just wanted to kind of show that one to you a little bit, because these are, you know, some of the stuff that you've seen now on this whole webinar are brand spanking new reports that are releasing right now that for some of our agencies that have foam already, you will start seeing some of those in your drop-down menus soon. The live workload report that we just showed is an additional report that can be quoted to you, but it's an add-on outside of foam. That is not a part of the foam product. But I wanted you to see something that was new that we just released out recently as well for fire.
Super.
So I think with that, if there's no more questions, I don't see any hands raised or anything, so I'm going to say that we'll go ahead and end 10 minutes early. And I want to say thank you to all, and we look forward to any comments, suggestions, recommendations, and anything you have for us that will help us with the product. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.